My name is Beau. I grew up in Fallon, Nevada, which is out in the middle of the desert. I was raised in the Adventist church. When I was a little kid, my parents decided they wanted religion for their kids. So they entered into the Adventist church so they could give us, I guess, a choice in the world. I was baptized when I was about 14 years old. It meant something at the time. I don't think I really understood what it really meant. But when I got into high school, life seemed to change pretty fast. It seems like I kind of started losing grip on who God was. The little bit I actually did manage to find out. About my sophomore year of high school, I started to kind of rebel against the rules of the schools I got keep putting into. Towards the end of my sophomore year, I started being a rebel amongst my classmates and not exactly caring about rules anymore. Junior year was a pretty good year. It went pretty smoothly. Got kicked out a couple times. Then it got into my senior year. Senior year, I discovered it's fun to be a rebel. It's fun to be the bad kid, I guess you could say, in school. Started drinking with my friends. Started chewing tobacco. Sit in the back of English class, wasted, with my head down on my desk. Of course, being from an Adventist academy, I got caught with this. So they gave me a choice. They says, you know, we know that you don't want to be here and you don't want to be a part of this, so why don't you make a decision, stay here or go home? I was tired of the school cramming Jesus down my throat, and I didn't really believe in it anymore. So I said, I'm going home. I'm going to go and get my GED and go into the work world. So I left high school. About 2 months into my senior year, I decided to try to go into the work world and get a real life and do as my father did and his father did before him, work with our hands. Just anything in manual labor. I went and I got my GED a couple months later. After that, my old man wanted me to go to truck driving school, so I went into truck driving school and got my CDL license at the age of 18, which led to my first job, which I got in March. I went to work for a farming business, which started out all right. It was just like a normal job, I guess. But as far as spiritually, I said, I don't want nothing to do with God after I got out of high school. And when I went into the work world, I really started to rebel against it and said, I don't want nothing to do. And I ran from God, and I ran from this distorted picture of who I thought God was. And so I said, I don't want nothing to do with it anymore. So I started drowning myself in work. If I wasn't working, I was in my room staring at a screen. When I was really young, I was introduced into gaming. All my friends liked playing video games. I liked it, loved it. I really found it kind of a drawing, kind of almost addictive. Kind of absorbed my thoughts when I was in high school. I spent a lot of time thinking about video games. After I left high school, I played a lot. After work, in my free time, on the weekends, I played all the time. I played because I wanted to drown out the life that I had created, a life without God that I had thrown away. I felt empty inside. I felt like I couldn't relate to people anymore. It began to absorb my mind, absorb all my time, to the point where it cut me off from my family. And the only people that actually accepted the fact that the only thing I talked about, the only thing I thought about was video games, was my two friends that I pretty much grew up with. My family didn't understand, so they kind of just shut off. People at work, a couple understood, but mostly didn't, so I just kind of like passed the time at work. Work was kind of stressful. I tried to make video games the purpose for my life, to drown out my problems at work, to drown out my problems in my days, family problems. I used it to drown out everything. Because I was a sixth-generation alcoholic, it became an addictive property, basically another numbing effect to the mind, so I could just drown out life itself. I had two really bad employments, so I had a lot of stress. I picked up smoking to help me deal with that stress, but my primary was coming home and staring at a screen and forgetting that I was in this world. In October, maybe August, my mom came to me and she says, I want you to go visit your older sister. She had mentioned that she had a guy there who needed help for a job. So I said, a great idea. I said, I'll go visit my sister. I haven't seen her in 4 or 5 years. Didn't really know who she was anymore, so I thought, well, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll go see my sister. Went to Minnesota for about a week to see my sister. I had a great time. I got to visit with her. I got to see what life was like outside of video games. Not completely, I still took them with me, but I got to see a little bit because I was trying to cut myself off just so I could talk to my sister and hang out with her family. It seemed very hard for me because I felt so awkward there because I didn't know how to socially interact really anymore because I drowned all my time and all my energy into video games, so communicating with people wasn't exactly my best forte, so I went back to playing video games in the evening. But one day she went and she says, hey, why don't we go for a walk? So I says, all right. So I went out down this trail that went back behind her apartment, and we were just talking casually. She could see I was struggling with things in my life. She asked me, she says, what do you think the purpose for living is? I said, I don't know, maybe to find things that make you happy, find things that give you satisfaction in life, pass the time, I guess. Now, my sister's been Bible working for 8 years. I knew she was a Bible thumper, as I called her at the time. So I was kind of hesitant to answer this, and I kind of knew the answer she was going to give me. And she gave me exactly what I thought she was going to give me. She says, well, why don't you see who God is and see if He can give you a purpose for living. I blew off the whole thing where she told me about God because I had rejected God. But one thing I couldn't reject was the question that she posed. What do you think the purpose for living is? That one hit me deep. I didn't have an answer for it. This whole time I thought, well, to play video games and to spend my time staring at a screen, that's what I thought the purpose was, just make yourself happy. Find things that make you happy in this life. But I honestly couldn't answer the question, what is the purpose? It was then I started to understand I didn't really have a purpose for living anymore. This inevitably made me more depressed. While I was there in Minnesota, I met with a guy who had a job that he needed help with. I met with him and he said, well, I'd love to have you because your work history and I could really use you. So The problem is I don't have any place in my employment right now. I'm pretty full with what I got. So I says, all right. I says, here's my call, here's my number. Call me when you have a position open or something. He says, will do. I returned back to Nevada, went back to work. I was home for 2 weeks. I went back in the same lifestyle, same thing, just felt like another day. Went back into the same life, went back to work. 2 weeks later, he calls me up and he says, I have a girl who left and I have a spot open for you if you're still interested in working for me. I said, oh yeah, for sure. I think I could do that. Let me just tell my boss that I'm leaving and see when I can leave. I went to my boss and told her that I would really like to leave the following week. She said, that's fine. I says, I know it's not 2 weeks notice. She says, I don't care. The second boss was not exactly the nicest person in the world. So the rest of that week I worked, and in my free time I packed my car and packed up everything I owned that I could fit in my car. At the end of that week I moved to Minnesota. Life was different in Minnesota. New culture, knew everything. But it was different. The atmosphere was different. The atmosphere was almost inviting me to step out of my video game world. Where I was living in Minnesota, it wasn't exactly convenient to smoke anymore due to family and because my sister was a Bible thumper or a Bible worker, and so her family, she didn't like smelling it. She didn't like it anymore, so I tried to quit. I quit over Christmas time, but I never crawled out of my video game world. I still went to work, even though I didn't have half the stress, I didn't have half the problems anymore at work. I still crawled into the world the only world I knew. I didn't have any friends really. I had my 2 friends, and the only way I really stayed in touch with them was Xbox Live or on my computer online, playing games. It's the only thing I ever did with them. So I stayed in my own little world. After a while, my sister asked me, she said, why don't you try coming to church with me? I said, yeah, sure, maybe I'll go to church, kind of ease my conscience. God never really let me go on my conscience. I always felt guilty about playing video games on Sabbath. I always felt guilty about things, but it just seemed like the dictator God that I actually thought I knew. So I went to church with her one time. Felt different. The atmosphere was different. I had grown up in the Adventist church from when I was a little kid all the way up into high school until I left after high school. But this church was different. The whole atmosphere, the whole thing was just different to me. It struck me as odd. And the question came back. Even after 3 months, the question just hit me again. What do you think the purpose for living is? This question seemed like I couldn't get away from it. I didn't have a purpose. And video games didn't feel like the right purpose. I really began to understand I didn't have much. I didn't have much of a life, really. My sister gave me a book. It's entitled See with New Eyes, written by Ty Gibson. Marvelous book. Highly suggest reading it. That book introduced to me a God I thought never existed. It was a God who wanted to have a personal relationship with me. It was a God who actually really wanted to love me. Actually cared about what I did. Actually cared about what I did to myself. I felt this burning desire inside of me that something out there actually really cared about me. After I read that book, I started reading my Bible in the morning. At first, I just gave 10 minutes because that's all I really wanted to give. I couldn't see myself getting out of bed for half an hour to read the Bible, and I'd just fall asleep reading it. So I went to just 10 minutes. After a while, I started spending more and more time just thinking about it. But I had a problem. It seemed like the more time I spent, it cut off my video games. I didn't get to spend much time playing video games anymore. I couldn't wake up early in the morning and play video games before I went to work. Now I just read my Bible. So I started feeling, well, maybe I'll just give up my video games in the morning and then just play them at night so I can spend time with God in the morning. It didn't work out so hot. I still wanted to play video games more than I wanted to spend with God, so I ended up playing video games instead of spending time with God. And then came to a point where I had that conscience, and now you want to spend time with God because you want to find out who He was, because this book said that God loves you and God wants to invest time in you, so now it's your turn to find out. You need to find out. He can offer you a purpose for living. If He wants to spend time with you and make you happy and give you a purpose. All right. I'll find out. So I tried to split it up and say, all right, I'm going to read my Bible, and then I'm going to go play video games. Then I'm going to go to work. At night, it was fat chance I would never spend time reading the Bible at night. I was too tired, and I wanted to hang out with my friends, and yeah, right. So in the morning was it. So I spent time in the morning with God, and I went and played my video games. Went to work. This worked out fine, except for one problem. After I'd read the Bible and go play video games, after video games, I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't remember what I read. I couldn't remember what I spent time thinking about. I said, oh, that's kind of odd. Why can't I remember anything? So I asked my sister, she knew more about this stuff than I did. I says, why can't I ever remember anything after I get done playing video games? So maybe God's letting you do that so you realize that video games is cutting Him out of your life. That hit me hard. Here I'm fighting for God, and I'm trying to cut Him out at the same time. Put Him in, cut Him out. Put Him in, come out. So I made the sacrifice. I said, all right, Lord. I'll spend time with You in the morning. I won't play video games. To me, it seemed like a huge sacrifice. Because then I didn't get to hang out with my friends because I was 2 hours ahead of them. Time differences made it allowed me to play with them before they went to work, before I went to work. So a huge sacrifice for me, I felt. But as I sacrificed that time to spend with God in the morning, reading, I found that after about a couple weeks or so, my days were different. Somehow or another, my days were more peaceful when I went to work. I could enjoy things. So I started noticing changes in my day just from the amount of time I spent in the morning trying to build a relationship with God. And even though I had no idea how, all I did is just read. Read and pray. After a while, the problems came back up. I had a hard time remembering things over the weekend. It came down to saying, you know what, maybe you should give up your video games on Sabbath. 'Cause you're sitting here trying to go to church every now and again, and you're sacrificing going to church and trying to build a relationship with God, and you're sacrificing it so you can play video games all day. And it ain't making you happy, so I said, all right, I'll give up playing video games on Saturday. So I gave it up. It was a hard thing. I started noticing how much I was really just addicted to video games, how much of my time it consumed, how much of my thoughts it consumed. It really started to bother me how much I was dedicating to video games. I really started to notice how much of an addiction I had with video games. I didn't want to admit it, but I was really starting to have an addiction. I really had an addiction. And all God was trying to do was get me away from that addiction. After the call to give it up on Sabbath, God felt like God came to me one day and said, I want you to get rid of it completely. Back at Christmas time, I quit smoking. Now it was April, and God was telling me, get rid of your video games. I want your time. I want your thoughts. And I can't spend any more time with you if you want to spend time staring at a screen, killing people, training your mind how to kill people in video games. So I can't spend any more time with you. That's what it felt like in my heart. So I said, all right. It took about a week contemplating it, rolling it around, and I said, no, I can't give it up. It's my friends. It's the only two friends I really have. And God wants me to just give that up? How can I just do that? I rolled around for a week for it, really struggled. But at the end of that week, I said, this is where I draw the line. I either find out who God is and find a purpose, or I stay stuck in this world where it's the same thing day in and day out that I've experienced for the last 2 years. It's been absolutely dissatisfying in life. So I said, all right, Lord. I got online, put my headset on, friends were online. I told them, I says, hey brothers, I'm gonna stop playing video games because I feel God's calling me away from it. I didn't really talk much about the whole relationship thing with God to my friends because they were raised in the Adventist church too, and they left because they were tired of the same thing I was tired of. I spent so much time blaspheming God in front of them and telling them F God and I don't care and I don't want nothing to do with God anymore, that I felt shame when it came down to telling them that I was leaving video games for God. So I just said, I'm going to quit playing video games because I think God's asking me to. I took a real humble pill to tell my friends that. Their only question was, why, man? God's got nothing for you. But I felt different in my heart. I says, yeah, maybe, but I'm going to find out. You might see me on in a couple weeks. You never know. Needless to say, that was the last time my friends ever saw me online. I took everything that I had, video game, every piece of entertainment that I had, and I put it in a Tupperware container and I stuck it in my closet. I had $2,000 worth of video equipment. I had my TV, my headset, my Xbox, my PS3. I had stacks of games. I had all the new titles that ever came out. I knew almost everything about every other game. I knew where to find everything. I memorized half the guidebooks just to get stuff. And I took all of it and I packed it away and I threw it in the back of my closet, and I says, I'm going to find out a different lifestyle. That was the best decision I ever made. After that, I started noticing that I started spending more and more time in the mornings, so much so that I had to spend more time in the evenings reading about God, finding out how God was. And it didn't seem to bother me anymore that I wasn't playing video games. I started noticing difference in my relationships on how things were going. I started noticing that I could talk to my sister more. I started noticing that I could start hanging out with my niece and nephew. I started feeling like I can actually have the patience with them. I used to not be able to have patience with children, but all of a sudden I felt that I could have patience with kids and I could start enjoying the small things in life. As I read more and more about God, I found out so many more exciting things about God that I could never find in the TV screen. All of a sudden, it's just the simplest of things, like I found out that every moment, every breath that I took, when I breathed in, it was a very gift from God. I could start savoring these small moments. And it added to my life abundantly daily. That I could invest in these small things that made my life so much easier. I didn't have to drown it out anymore. I could start looking for the small things. Yeah, I had problems. Yeah, things came around and I wanted to turn back around and run back to video games to solve my problems, but I thought, well, God's already brought so much joy into my life about bringing me more fullness. Why can't I just turn to Him when I'm having a problem? So when I had problems, I went to the Bible and I tried to find peace in it, and I was richly rewarded for it. It finally seemed like God was giving me a purpose. And to me, this was the most exciting thing in the world. My friends would call me up and they were worried about me because after 2 months of not being on Xbox Live anymore, they thought I was just like dropped off the face of the earth. So they actually gave me a phone call for the first time in 6 months. I said, "Dog, where are you at, man?" I said, "Dog, you would not believe the things I've got to experience." I felt like my mind opened up. I felt like I could think straight again. I felt like the world was a brand new place because I wasn't consumed with what I was doing on a video game. It was this time that I started realizing that God was giving me a purpose and a reason for living. And the joy that I got to feel through it, there's no words that can describe it. It was a deeper joy than I've ever experienced. Yeah, I've had good moments playing video games. Yeah, I've had a lot of good laughs. There's been some pretty funny moments, and yeah, I do miss those moments. But that peace that you search for in a TV screen or shoot, anything in entertainment. You watch movies, same thing. You sit there and you're trying to feel this longing for peace, and for happiness, and for joy. And you have it for a moment, and then it's broken, it's gone. But I got to experience, feels like God gave me that peace deep down inside. He gave me that happiness that I was searching for. It came with a lot of sacrifices, yeah, but those sacrifices seem as nothing. With all this deeper peace. There was times where I got bored, times where I looked at my screen and said, "Man, I really wish I could play something right now." But I thought about it and I compared it and says, "Yeah, but I wasn't happy before. Why would I be happy now doing it?" So I turned to the Lord and I went and spent time with Him in His Word. Spent time in reading books about Him. And I found it was so much more deeper. Life's a fuller story now. Each day is a new day. Each moment's a new moment. Because I have a purpose for living. I have a purpose for fighting through the trials each day. I don't have to let it bug me much. I don't have to drown it out. I take it to God, and I can have peace and I can have joy with God.